Summer in Austin. Oak Hill Lane, lined with neat two-story houses with white fences and manicured lawns, lived its own measured life. Children rode bicycles, neighbors' dogs barked at passing cars, and the spirit of Saturday evening was in the air, the one when all problems are postponed until Monday. Today, the Clarks were hosting a barbecue, and the yard of their house was already buzzing with voices and laughter. Jake Clark stood at the grill, flipping sizzling ribs. His broad shoulders, covered in a checkered shirt, glistened with sweat, and he held tongs in his hands like a conductor's baton. He was 38, but he looked younger, tanned skin, blonde hair, slightly tousled by the wind, and a smile that made everyone around him relax. He was the soul of this street, a man who could gather neighbors with one call. "Hey, Matt, give me another beer," Jake shouted without turning around. "Otherwise, I'll burn here while you're all chilling." Matt Wilson, lanky and slightly stooped, sat in a folding chair at a long wooden table piled high with bowls of potato salad and corn. He was 39 and looked like a typical engineer, calm, with short hair and a plain gray t-shirt. He lazily reached into the cooler, pulled out a bottle of Shiner, and tossed it across the yard to Jake. "Catch, barbecue hero," Matt grinned. "Just don't drop it, otherwise Sarah will say again that I'm making you drunk." Sarah Wilson, sitting next to Emily Clark on the garden swing, rolled her eyes. She was 37 and wore her brown hair in a loose ponytail. In denim shorts and a white t-shirt, she looked like a woman who was not afraid of night shifts at the hospital or sharp jokes at the desk. "Matt, I will say that you get everyone drunk, including yourself," she retorted, taking a sip from her glass of lemonade. "Emily, tell him he's hopeless." Emily laughed, throwing back her long blonde hair. She was 36 and what they call a cover mom, slender, with soft features, but with slight shadows under her eyes, the result of 2 children and endless freelance design assignments. She sat with her legs crossed in a light sundress that fluttered in the warm wind. "Sarah, if I start raising him, I'll have to take on Jake too," she said, nodding at her husband. "And this is already a mission impossible." "Oh, come on, I'm perfect." Jake winked at her, transferring the ribs to a plate. "Who else can grill meat, entertain guests, and look like a Texas Ranger at the same time?" "A Texas Ranger with a beer belly," Sarah joked, and everyone laughed. The laughter was drowned out by the creaking of the gate as Tom and Linda Reed entered the yard. Tom, tall and thin, with short dark hair and a formal polo shirt, looked a little older than his 40s. He worked as an analyst at a bank and always seemed a little distant, as if he was calculating something in his head, even on vacation. Linda, a 38-year-old teacher with kind eyes and a shoulder-length bob, was holding a bottle of red wine, their usual contribution to such evenings. "Hey guys," Linda said, smiling. "I hope we are not late for the main course." "You're just in time," Jake replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "Tom, take a chair. Linda, wine on the table. Here it's like in a movie about perfect neighbors, only with the best meat." Tom nodded, pulled a chair next to Matt, and sat down with his arms crossed. He rarely spoke first, but his witty remarks always hit the mark when he did open his mouth. "If this is a movie, then I'm clearly not the main character," he muttered, looking at the lively bustle around him. "You're just being modest," Sarah winked at him. "You have the role of a wise observer, like in those movies where the guy in the corner sees everything but remains silent." "Maybe so," Tom shrugged, and Linda glanced at him quickly, as if checking to see if he was moving away too much. Children ran around the yard. 8-year-old Oliver and 5-year-old Sophie Clark chased 10-year-old Zach Wilson with water guns. Their squeals mixed with the sound of cicadas and the hiss of the grill. Emily looked at them and sighed. "Sometimes I think they're the only ones who really live here," she said quietly to Sarah. "We just pretend we're still young." Sarah looked at her with slight surprise. "Hey, what's wrong with you? Are you okay?" Emily smiled, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Yes, I don't know. Sometimes you want something new. Aren't you tired of all this?" She gestured around the yard, table, laughter, beer, routine. Sarah shrugged. I'm tired, of course. But we have this. She nodded at Matt and Jake, who were now arguing about how much sauce they needed for the ribs. This is our life. You're probably right. Emily took a sip of her lemonade, but her gaze lingered on Matt a little longer than necessary. He caught her eyes, and for a second something inexplicable hung between them like a light electric discharge. Jake clapped his hands, breaking the moment. Okay, people, the meat is ready. Plates in hand, don't be shy. Kids, come here before Zach fills you with water up to your ears. Everyone stirred and reached for the table. Linda poured the wine, Tom helped himself to a piece of corn, and Matt helped Sophie carry the plate. Sarah and Emily got up from the swing, continuing to chat about some gossip from the hospital. The evening went on as usual, and no one noticed how the shadows lengthened and the air became a little heavier. Jake, you're running low on coal, Matt noted, looking into the bag by the grill. Do you want me to run for mine? No, I'll go myself. Jake waved him off. I have a couple more bags in the garage. Emily, take care of the ribs. I'll be there in a second. He threw the tongs on the table and headed towards the house through the back door. Emily stood up, walked over to the grill, picked up tongs, and began flipping the meat. Matt, having finished with Sophie's plate, walked over to help her. Careful, don't get burned, he said, extending his hand to the bars. Their fingers accidentally touched, and Emily flinched. She raised her eyes, and again this discharge was short, but noticeable. Thank you, she muttered, looking away. I can handle it. Let me hold the plate, Matt suggested, stepping closer. His voice was lower than usual, almost a whisper. You know I won't let the meat fall. Emily smiled weakly, but something tightened in her chest. She felt the warmth of his hand next to her, the smell of his cologne mixed with the smoke of the grill. It was stupid, ridiculous, but for some reason my heart beat faster. Sarah, sitting at the table, shouted, Hey, don't burn everything to hell there. I don't eat coals. Don't worry, we're professionals, Matt said, but his eyes never left Emily. Tom, sitting aside, noticed this exchange of glances. He frowned, but remained silent, taking a sip of wine. Linda chatted with the children, not paying attention. The evening continued. Smoke from the grill rose into the evening sky, colored crimson and gold. The Clark's barbecue was in full swing. The plates were empty, beer bottles were clinking in the cooler, and the children, tired from running around, were now sitting on the grass, looking at the fireflies. The adults sat on chairs, lazily exchanging jokes. Jake, having returned with the coal, resumed his post at the grill, waving his tongs like a general on a battlefield. Well, who's ready for the second helping? He shouted, throwing a piece of meat into the air and deftly catching it on a plate. We have enough supplies here for a week. Sarah raised her hand, grinning. Only if you stop juggling food like a circus performer. Zach has already asked about signing you up for the show. Let him try, Jake winked at Matt's son, who was sitting with Sophie and Oliver. I'll teach him a few tricks. Emily stood next to the grill, holding a plastic plate of leftover corn. She tried to focus on Jake's laughter, on the children's voices, but her thoughts kept returning to that moment at the grill when Matt touched her hand. It was nothing, she told herself. Just fatigue, heat, a couple of extra sips of lemonade with rum, which Sarah slipped her under the guise of an innocent cocktail. But why then was her skin still burning where he had touched her? Matt sat at the table, sipping a beer and listening to Tom talk about mortgage rates. His gaze slid to Emily every now and then imperceptibly, as he thought. She stood with her back to him, her sundress fluttering slightly in the wind, and Matt found himself staring at the curve of her neck a little longer than he should have. Stop it, he told himself, clutching the bottle. He was married for 14 years, loved Sarah, and loved Zach. But in recent months, a kind of silence has settled in their house, not hostile, but simply empty. Work, school, bills. And here Emily is so familiar, but suddenly alien, as if he saw her for the first time. Hey, Matt, are you with us? Tom snapped his fingers in front of his face. I'm talking about interest rates here, and you're hovering somewhere. Oh, yes, sorry, Matt shook himself, forcing himself to smile. I was just thinking. Tired during the week. Tom nodded, but his gaze lingered on Matt a little longer than usual. He was observant, too observant, as everyone on the street said. Linda, sitting nearby, sipped wine and chatted with Sarah about school fees, not noticing her husband's tension. Jake clapped his hands, breaking everyone from their conversations. Okay, guys, we're running out of coal again. I'll go get another bag, otherwise we'll all remain hungry here. Emily, hold the line. He threw the tongs on the table and headed towards the house, whistling something from country music. The door slammed behind him, and the courtyard became a little quieter. Emily sighed, looking at the nearly extinguished grill. Matt, can you help? She asked without turning around. We need to bring a couple of chairs from the barn, otherwise the children will soon start whining that they have nowhere to sit. Matt froze, but nodded immediately, placing the bottle on the table. Of course, now. Sarah raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, turning her attention to her conversation with Linda. Tom looked after Matt, but remained seated, twirling the glass in his hands. The shed stood in the far corner of the yard, behind the blackberry bushes that Jake kept meaning to prune. It was a small wooden structure with peeling paint, littered with gardening tools, old bicycles, and boxes of Christmas decorations. Emily opened the creaky door, and the smell of dust and dry grass rushed inside. The chairs are somewhere in the back, she said, going inside. I think it's under that shelf. Matt entered next, closing the door so as not to interfere with the light of the lantern in the yard. It was cramped and dark inside, with only thin strips of light coming through the cracks in the walls. They silently made their way to the back of the barn, where indeed there were two folding chairs covered in dust. Here they are. Matt reached for one, but caught a shaky shelf. The box of garlands fell with a crash, and Emily instinctively stepped towards him to help. Their hands collided again, for the second time that evening. But now there was no grill, no laughter, no witnesses. Only dusty air and silence broken by their breathing. Emily looked up and Matt didn't look away. Something clicked as if someone had turned a switch that they had both avoided for years. We shouldn't, she whispered, but her voice was shaking not from protest, but from something else. I know, he answered, but stepped closer. And then they fell apart. It was fast, furious, without words. Emily pressed herself against him, her fingers grabbed his t-shirt, and Matt grabbed her. The sundress rode up, his hands slid, and all thoughts about Sarah, Jake, the children dissolved in this crazy animal rush. It lasted minutes short, hot, full of shame and desire at the same time. When it was over, they stumbled away from each other, breathing heavily. Emily straightened her dress. Matt ran his hand through his hair, trying to compose himself. Reality hit them like a truck. Lord, what have we done? She whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know. Matt looked at the floor, clenching his fists. This shouldn't have happened. Jake will be back soon. Emily grabbed a chair, avoiding his gaze. We have to go. Matt nodded, grabbed a second chair, and they walked out of the barn, trying not to look at each other. Nothing had changed in the yard. The children were laughing. Sarah was telling Linda a story. The grill was smoking. But for the two of them, the world was already different. Tom, who was sitting with a glass of wine, noticed their exit. He stood up to throw away his empty plate and walked past the barn, glancing at the door. Through a crack in the wall, he saw a crumpled box on the floor, a shadow of movement, and froze. His heart sank. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew what he saw. Matt and Emily returned to the table, their faces tense, their movements cutting. Tom turned away, feeling a lump forming in his throat. Tom, are you okay? Linda called out to him, noticing how he froze by the trash can. Yes, he said, too abruptly. I'll go have a smoke. He hadn't smoked for 2 years, but Linda didn't elaborate. She frowned as she watched him go, then returned to her conversation with Sarah. Jake walked out of the house, carrying a sack of coal. Well, did you let me through? He shouted, throwing the bag towards the grill. Emily, didn't you burn everything down there without me? No, everything is under control, she answered, forcing herself to smile. Her voice sounded dull, but Jake didn't notice he was too busy with Cole. Matt sat down next to Sarah, trying not to look at Emily. Sarah put her hand on his knee, and he winced. "You're kind of nervous," she said, narrowing her eyes. "Did something happen?" "No, it's just the heat," he lied, taking a sip of his beer. Tom returned to the table, silently looking at Matt and Emily. He didn't know what to do with what he saw. Night fell on Oak Hill Lane as softly as a velvet blanket, but for some it brought heaviness rather than peace. The Clark's barbecue ended around 10, with the kids asleep on the living room couch, the adults clearing the table, and empty beer bottles clinking in the trash can. Jake, pleased with himself, clapped Matt on the shoulder as he said goodbye. "Great evening, brother," he said, smiling widely. "We need to get together more often. Maybe next week at your place." Matt nodded, but his smile was as tight as a guitar string before snapping. "Yeah, we'll see," he muttered, avoiding Jake's gaze. "Tired today, work." "Well, rest, hero." Jake winked and turned to Emily, who stood at the door with her arms crossed. Are you coming? We need to put the children to bed." "I'm coming," she answered quietly, forcing herself to step into the house. Her voice was shaking on the edge, but Jake, as always, was too lost in thought to notice. Sarah hugged Emily goodbye, not feeling how tense she was. "Good night, friend," she said, yawning. "I'll call you tomorrow and discuss what to do with this school fee." "Yes, of course," Emily forced a smile, but her eyes were empty. Matt and Sarah left through the gate, holding the hand of a half-asleep Zach. Tom and Linda said their last goodbyes, Linda hugging Jake and Tom simply nodding with a quick glance at Emily. She felt this look like a prick, but did not look up. The door to the Clark house closed, and the street fell silent. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, mechanically washing grease off the dishes. Jake carried Sophie upstairs while Oliver was already asleep in his room. The house was quiet, but a storm was raging inside Emily. She looked at her hands, red from the hot water, and saw only one thing: how they clung to Matt's t-shirt in the barn. The smell of his skin, the heat of his body, the creaking of the boards under her feet, all this emerged again and again, like frames from a movie that she could not turn off. "What have I done?" she thought, pursing her lips. She was 36, 2 children, 12 years of marriage to Jake. He wasn't perfect, noisy, sometimes inattentive, but he loved her. And she loved him, or thought she did. But today something broke. It wasn't just sex, it was escape, a scream she couldn't utter out loud. And now this cry was choking her. Will you drown the plates there?" Jake's voice came from the living room. He walked downstairs holding an empty bottle of water. "Go to bed, I'll finish it." "No, I'll finish," she answered too sharply without turning around. "Go to bed." Jake shrugged and walked away, accustomed to her occasional outbursts. Emily was left alone, looking out the dark window above the sink. Her reflection looked at her disapprovingly. Matt was sitting in the car. Sarah had already put Zach to bed and was probably taking a shower. He could hear the water running through the open bathroom window. But he couldn't bring himself to enter. His hands were clutching the steering wheel, and one question was spinning in his head. How did I get to this? He didn't plan this. I never looked at Emily as a woman. She was Jake's wife, Sarah's friend, part of their common life. But today something clicked in the barn. Maybe it was her tiredness, her quiet melancholy that he felt when she started talking about something new. Maybe it was his own emptiness that he didn't notice until it burst out. He didn't know. All he knew was that he had betrayed Sarah, Jake, everyone. The door to the house opened and Sarah looked out, wrapped in a towel. "Matt, why are you sitting there?" she shouted. "Go already, I want to sleep." "I'm coming," he responded. His voice sounded muffled, as if coming from underground. He got out of the car, but every step towards the house was like a step towards the scaffold. Inside, Sarah glanced at him quickly. "You look strange today," she said, drying her hair. "Something at work?" "Yes, I'm just exhausted," he lied, looking away. "I'll go take a shower." She nodded without insisting. Matt locked himself in the bathroom, turned on the water, and stood under the stream, hoping that it would wash away the evening. but she couldn't wash away what he had done. Tom lay in bed next to Linda, looking at the ceiling. Their bedroom was small and cozy, with bookshelves lining the walls and a photo from their wedding on the nightstand. Linda was reading a book, but her eyes kept flicking to her husband. He had been too quiet since they got back from the barbecue. "Tom, are you okay?" she finally asked, closing the book. "You've been kind of, I don't know, twitchy all evening." He turned his head, meeting her gaze. Linda always saw right through him. That was why he loved her and what sometimes irritated him. "I'm just tired," he said, but his voice wavered. "Don't lie to me." Linda sat down cross-legged. "You went to smoke, although you quit 2 years ago. What's happened?" Tom clenched his jaw. He didn't want to talk. I didn't want to drag her into this. But what he saw in the barn burned him from the inside like acid. He couldn't pretend nothing had happened. I, I saw something," he began, sitting down. "At the barbecue, when Matt and Emily went to get chairs." Linda frowned. "What did you see?" He hesitated, looking away. They, they were in the barn, together, and it didn't seem like just a conversation." Linda froze, her eyes widening. "Are you saying, what are they?" "I'm not sure what exactly." Tom rubbed his temples. "But it was wrong. The box fell, I heard a noise, saw shadows. They walked out, and both looked like they had been caught." "Jesus, Tom!" Linda leaned back against the pillows, pressing her hand to her forehead. "I know," he swallowed. "That's why I didn't want to talk." "But you couldn't remain silent." Linda looked at him, her voice becoming harsher. "We can't just sit and pretend we didn't see anything. Sarah is my friend, Jake too. And what do you propose?" Tom raised his voice. "Go and say, 'Hey guys, your spouses were having sex in the barn while you were eating ribs.' It's none of our business." "Linda, what if it were you?" She jumped out of bed, her eyes sparkling. "If I found out that you were with someone, I would like to know. From anyone, even from a neighbor." "But it's not me," Tom snapped, "and not you. This is their life." Linda fell silent, looking at him. She was always the one who believed in truth, in morality, in doing the right thing. But now she felt like this choice was tearing her in half. "We can't just forget," she finally said, sitting back down. "But to run away with this, I don't know, Tom. I don't know what to do." He nodded, feeling tiredness wash over him. "Me too. Let's go to sleep. Morning will put everything in its place." But the morning did not bring clarity. Tom closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. Linda lay next to her, looking into the darkness, and thought about how the truth can destroy not only those who hide it, but also those who know it. The sun rose over Oak Hill Lane, bathing the street in a soft golden light. The grass glistened with morning dew, and birds chirped on the branches of the old oak tree near the Clark house. Sunday started out as usual. A lawnmower was humming somewhere, neighborhood kids were already riding their bikes, and the smell of coffee was in the air. But behind the closed doors of the 3 houses on this street, the night left traces that morning could not erase. Emily woke up first. She lay in bed next to Jake, listening to his breathing. His arm was thrown over the pillow, and his face, relaxed in sleep, looked almost boyish. She looked at him and felt a lump growing in her chest, a mixture of guilt, fear, and something she couldn't name. Last night seemed like a dream, a nightmare that was supposed to dissolve with the first rays of the sun. But he didn't dissolve. It was all more real than she wanted to admit. She stood up, careful not to wake Jake, and went downstairs. The kitchen still contained traces of the barbecue, empty bottles in the trash, a sticky trace of sauce on the table. Emily turned on the coffee maker and leaned against the counter, closing her eyes. "It was a mistake," she repeated to herself. "A mistake that can be forgotten, buried like an old toy in a sandbox." But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Matt. And it wasn't just shame. This was worse, the part of her mind, the part she hated, liked it. The door to the living room creaked and Emily flinched. Jake walked in, rubbing his eyes, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and shorts. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he said, yawning. "Why are you so early?" "I couldn't sleep," she answered, turning to the coffee maker. Would you like some coffee? Yeah, pour it. He plopped down on a chair, looking at her. You were kind of quiet yesterday. Everything is fine. Emily froze, holding the mug in her hands. His voice was so normal, so trusting, that she wanted to scream. But she just nodded. I'm just tired. Kids, barbecue, you know. Yes, Sophie was running around like a hurricane yesterday. Jake grinned, taking the coffee. Maybe we can rest today. Shall we go somewhere to the lake? We'll see, she muttered, taking a sip from her mug. She needed to go out and get some air, but the thought of pretending to be a happy family all day suffocated her. Jake shrugged and looked at his phone, checking the news. Emily looked at him and thought, he doesn't know, and he shouldn't find out. Never. Matt sat in his backyard, holding a cold bottle of water. Sarah was still sleeping. Zach was watching cartoons in the living room, and he ran here, away from their voices. The morning was fresh, but his forehead was covered with sweat not from the heat, but from what was happening inside. He stayed up almost all night, replaying in his head, Emily, this crazy moment that he couldn't even explain to himself. I'm not like that, he thought, clutching the bottle. He was a good husband, a good father. Sarah was his rock, his best friend. But yesterday he betrayed her not just with a thought, but with an action, rude, irreversible. And worst of all, he couldn't say he was sorry. Not completely. There was something about it, the passion, the risk, the way Emily looked at him, that woke him up after months of drab routine. And that scared him most of all. The door to the porch opened and Sarah walked out, barefoot and wearing a long t-shirt. Why are you sitting here alone? She asked, squinting in the sun. This is the third time Zach asks where Dad is. I'm just thinking. Matt forced a smile. It's a good morning. Sarah came over, sat down next to him, and laid her head on his shoulder. You didn't seem like yourself yesterday, she said quietly. Are you sure everything is fine? Her voice was soft, caring, and it hit him like a knife. He swallowed, feeling his throat tighten. Yes, I'm just tired, he lied for the third time that morning. Work, you know. Well, rest today. She patted his knee and stood up. I'll go make breakfast. Do you want pancakes? Yeah, come on, he nodded, looking after her. When the door closed, he covered his face with his hands and exhaled. What the hell am I doing? Tom and Linda were sitting at breakfast in their small kitchen. There were plates of toast and jam on the table, coffee was steaming in mugs, but the food remained untouched. The night passed in silence. They went to bed, but did not sleep, each immersed in their own thoughts. The morning brought no relief. Linda looked at Tom over the top of her mug, her fingers nervously fiddling with her napkin. You've been silent all evening, she finally said, and at night too. What are we going to do, Tom? He put down the fork he was holding just for show and sighed. I don't know, Linda. I've been thinking about this all morning, and I don't have an answer. But we can't just sit. Her voice became sharper. If this is true, if Matt and Emily, this is a betrayal. Sarah and Jake are our friends. What if it's not true? Tom looked at her. His eyes were tired. What if I was wrong? I saw shadows, heard noises. Maybe they were just arguing or dropping something. Linda snorted, leaning back in her chair. You don't believe it yourself. You said they came out as if they had been caught. Tom, I know you. You wouldn't have come up with this. He pursed his lips. She was right, he didn't make it up. He saw Matt and Emily come out of the barn, her hair disheveled, his t-shirt wrinkled. It wasn't an argument. This was something else, and he knew what it was. Let's say you're right, he said slowly. And what? We go to Jake and Sarah and say, hey, it looks like your spouses slept with each other in the barn. Can you imagine what will happen? I can imagine what will happen if we remain silent. Linda stood up, her hands shaking. Sarah will find out someday. Or Jake. And if they understand that we knew and were silent, they will never forgive us. And if we tell, they'll hate us right now, Tom retorted, also standing up. This is not our war, Linda. These are their marriages, their mistakes. But we are part of this, she approached him. her voice becoming quieter but harsher. "We live on this street. We are friends. If it were you, Tom, if you cheated on me, I would want to know, even if it killed me." He froze, looking at her. Linda rarely raised her voice, but now there was steel in her eyes. She wouldn't back down, he realized. But he couldn't just take it and destroy everything. "Let's wait," he said finally. "A day or two. Let's see how they behave. If something is wrong, we will solve it. But not now." Linda nodded, but her face remained tense. "Fine, but I can't remain silent for long, Tom. It's too big." He turned away, looking out the window. Behind the glass, the Clark children ran out into the yard, Oliver pushing Sophie on the swing. Everything looked the same as yesterday morning. But Tom knew it was an illusion. Something had already broken, and he was afraid that the children would be trapped under the rubble. Emily walked out into the yard, holding coffee in her hands. Oliver and Sophie screamed as they chased each other, and she tried to smile. But her gaze involuntarily slid to the Wilson house across the street. Matt stood outside the garage, tinkering with Zach's bike. Their eyes met for a second, and both immediately looked away. She clutched the mug. "We can handle it," she thought. "It was a one-time thing. No one will know." By noon, the heat had already covered the street, forcing children to hide in the shade and adults to turn on the air conditioners. Emily stood at the living room window, watching Oliver and Sophie play with the water hose in the yard. Jake sat on the couch, flipping through the sports channel, and from time to time made comments about baseball. She tried to focus on the children, on her husband, on normalcy. But her thoughts were elsewhere. Can you hear?" Jake's voice broke her out of her trance. He looked at her with narrowed eyes. "I said, maybe we can order pizza for lunch. The children will be delighted." "Oh yes, that's a good idea." She forced herself to smile, moving away from the window. "I'll call." She picked up her phone and started scrolling through the delivery menu, but her fingers were shaking. Jake noticed this, frowning. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, turning off the TV. Emily swallowed, feeling her throat tighten. He looked at her so openly, so trustingly, that she wanted to run away. "I just didn't get enough sleep," she lied, not meeting his eyes. "It's okay." "Well, okay," Jake shrugged, but his gaze lingered on her. "If anything, tell me. You know I'm always there." "I know," she muttered, leaving for the kitchen under the pretext of calling. Closing the door, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. "He mustn't find out," she repeated to herself. But the more she repeated it, the less she believed it. Matt was fiddling with Zach's bike outside the garage, trying to distract himself. Zach sat nearby on the grass, playing with a toy truck, and Sarah went out into the yard with 2 glasses of lemonade. She placed one next to Matt and sat on the porch step, looking at him. "You've been like a zombie all day," she said, taking a sip from her glass. "What's wrong with you?" Matt froze, holding the wrench in his hands. Her voice was light, almost joking, but there was a hint of worry in it. He hated himself for it, for making her worry, for not being able to look her in the eyes. "Nothing," he answered, too quickly. "I'm just tired. Work, heat." "You said that yesterday, too," Sarah squinted, putting the glass on the ground. "Matt, I've known you for 14 years. When you lie, your neck turns red, and she's red now." He instinctively touched his neck, cursing himself in his thoughts. She was right, he had never been good at lying to her. But now he had no choice. "Sarah, it's okay," he said, trying to sound convincing. "Just exhausted. Let's not make a drama out of this." She looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "Okay, whatever you say." She stood up, dusting off her shorts. "But if something's wrong, you know where to find me." Matt nodded without looking up. When she went into the house, he threw the key on the ground and put his head in his hands. She'll notice, he thought. Sarah wasn't one to just accept silence. She will dig until she finds the truth. So what then? His gaze involuntarily slid to the Clark house across the street. Emily stood by the window, but immediately turned away when she noticed him. It was like an electric shock, short but painful. They both knew they couldn't pretend forever. Tom was sitting on the porch of his house, holding a mug of coffee in his hands. Linda went to the grocery store, leaving him alone, and he was grateful for the silence. Last night hung over him like a thundercloud. The conversation with Linda did not solve anything, it only added more questions. He wanted to forget. He wanted to convince himself that he was mistaken. But he couldn't. He looked outside, watching Oliver and Sophie running with the hose, Matt fixing his bike, Emily flashing through the window. Everything looked the same as always, but he knew it was a lie. He saw how they avoided looking at each other all evening. This was no accident. It was something more. Linda returned half an hour later, carrying bags of groceries. She put them in the kitchen and came out to Tom, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Are you still sitting here?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "Did you see anything interesting?" "Just thinking," he replied, looking at the Wilson house. "They're there as if nothing happened." Linda followed his gaze. "Matt and Sarah, or are you talking about Emily?" "Both." Tom took a sip of coffee, but it was already cold. "They're behaving normally." "Too normal." "Maybe you were mistaken," Linda said without much confidence. "Maybe it wasn't what you thought." "I'd like to think so," he turned to her. "But you saw them yesterday. They barely spoke to each other. And with us, too." Linda nodded, her face becoming serious. "I noticed." Later in the day, Emily went to the mailboxes along the road to pick up newspapers. She moved quickly, hoping to avoid encounters. But fate, as luck would have it, decided otherwise. Matt left the house at the same time, heading towards his box. They collided at the edge of the sidewalk and both froze. "Hi," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "Hello," she replied, looking at the ground. Her heart was pounding so hard that she was afraid he would hear. They stood silently, like two teenagers caught stealing. Finally, Matt spoke. "We need to forget," he said, clutching the newspaper in his hands. It shouldn't happen again." "I know." Emily looked up, and for a second their eyes met. In his eyes, Ojai saw the same thing that I felt myself: fear, guilt, and something else that had no name. "Nobody will know, right?" "Nobody," he nodded, but his voice trembled. "We can handle it." She nodded in response, and they went their separate ways, he to his house, she to hers. But both knew that this was not the end. This was just the beginning. Tom looked at them from the window of his house, standing behind the curtain. He saw their awkwardness, their short conversation, their glances. Monday came to Oak Hill Lane with its usual bustle. The kids left for school on the yellow bus, Jake and Matt went to work, and Sarah left for her day shift at the hospital. The street emptied, leaving Emily and Linda in their homes, each with their own thoughts. But the silence was deceptive underneath it. Something was seething that no one wanted to name out loud. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open. She needed to finish a logo design for a client, but the cursor had been blinking on a blank screen for half an hour. Her thoughts were not here, they were returning to the barn, to Matt, to that short conversation at the mailboxes yesterday. "We can handle it," he said. But she couldn't cope. Guilt was choking her, but the worst thing was that she couldn't stop thinking about him. It was like a disease, like an itch that could not be scratched. She slammed the lid of her laptop and stood up. "I need to go out," she decided. Sitting at home was unbearable. She grabbed her keys and bag and went out to the car. A trip to the supermarket is what she needs. Routine, distraction, anything to get Matt out of his head. Matt sat in his office in downtown Austin, looking at blueprints for a new bridge. His work as an engineer usually calmed him: numbers, lines, logic. But today, everything was different. "Hey, Matt, are you okay?" A colleague, Bill, looked out from behind the partition. "It's like you're on another planet today." "Yes, everything is fine." Matt forced himself to smile. "I just didn't get enough sleep." "Well, hold on." Bill shrugged and returned to his desk. Matt threw the pen into the drawer and stood up. He needed air. He told the boss that he was going to the site to check the materials and went out to the car. But instead of construction, he headed to the H-E-B supermarket on the outskirts of town. He didn't need food, he needed movement to drown out the noise in his head. Emily pushed her cart down the cereal aisle, throwing boxes of cereal and pasta into it without much attention. The store was full of sounds, the beeping of scanners, children crying, the voices of customers. She hoped it would distract her, but every time she saw the man in the gray t-shirt, her heart sank. It's not him, she repeated to herself, but checked again and again. She turned towards the frozen food section, and then their paths crossed. Matt stood by the pizza refrigerator, holding a pack of beer. He looked up, and their gazes collided as if someone had pressed the button of fate. Emily froze, her hands gripping the handle of the cart. "You? What are you doing here?" She gasped, her voice barely audible. "Same as you, probably." Matt stepped closer, his face tense. They stood in silence, surrounded by the hum of refrigerators and the rustle of other people's steps. It was ridiculous, dangerous, but none of them left. "We agreed to forget," Emily said, looking at him. "Why can't I?" "Because I can't either," he answered, and his voice trembled. "I tried, Emily. All day yesterday, all night. But you are everywhere." She swallowed, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. It was wrong, but his words touched something inside something that she was trying to strangle. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Not together." "I know." Matt put the beer back in the refrigerator, but didn't leave. "But I don't want to leave." Emily looked at him, and a struggle flashed in her eyes between duty and desire, between who she should be and who she became that night. She stepped towards him, only a few inches separating them. "It's a mistake," she said, but her voice was weak. "Then why does it seem right?" Matt leaned closer, and their breath mingled. They didn't plan this, but when their lips met, it was like an explosion, short, furious, full of despair. They backed away almost immediately, looking around, but no one noticed the customers were walking by, minding their own business. "Damn," Matt ran his hand over his face. "We can't continue like this." "I know," Emily stepped back, her hands shaking. "But I don't know how to stop." He looked at her, and in his eyes there was the same storm that raged inside her. "Let's get out of here," he said quietly. Let's talk. Somewhere where they won't see us." Emily knew she had to say no, but she nodded. They left the cart and beer at the store and went out to his car in the parking lot. Matt started the engine, and they drove away from the supermarket, towards an old park near the Colorado River, where locals rarely visited. It was crazy, but they couldn't stop. There was silence in the car, except for the hum of the air conditioner. Emily looked out the window, clutching her seat belt. "What are we doing, Matt?" she asked finally. "I don't know," he answered, without taking his eyes off the road. "But I can't pretend it doesn't exist." They parked by the river, under the shade of a huge pecan tree. It was quiet around, only the rustling of leaves and the splash of water. Matt turned off the engine, and they sat looking forward. "It was a mistake," Emily said, but her voice was empty. "In the barn, we shouldn't have." "Yes," he nodded, "but it happened. And now, I don't know how to go back." She turned to him, and their eyes met again. The tension was palpable, like electric current. "I don't want to destroy my family," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Jake, the kids, they don't deserve this." "Me too," Matt squeezed the steering wheel. "Sarah, Zach, I love them. But you're like fire, Emily. I can't put it out." A tear rolled down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a trembling hand. "We have to stop," she whispered, "right now." "Yes," he agreed, but neither of them moved. And then they broke again. It was inevitable, like a wave that cannot be stopped. When they pulled away, they were both breathing heavily. Emily straightened her hair, and Matt buttoned his shirt. "This is the last one," she said, looking at the floor. "No more." "Yes," he nodded, but there was no confidence in his voice. They were silent the whole way back to the supermarket. Matt dropped her off at her car, and they parted ways, she to the house, he to the office. Tom stood at the window of his house, looking out onto the street. He saw Emily leave in the morning and Matt return later than usual. He didn't know where they were, but he felt something was happening. and this feeling grew like a weed that can't be pulled out. Linda came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "You're at the window again," she said, frowning. "What are you looking for?" "Nothing," he lied, walking away. "I'm just thinking." Linda stood in the kitchen, looking at the mountain of dishes in the sink. She stayed up almost all night, replaying the conversation with Tom in her head. His words, "This is not our war," sounded logical, but did not reassure. She was a teacher, a person who believed in rules, in honesty, in the fact that truth always wins. But now this truth lay on her like a stone, and she could no longer bear it. Tom went to work, leaving her alone. She picked up the phone and dialed Sarah's number, but hung up without waiting for an answer. "What do I say?" she thought, clutching the phone. "Hey, Sarah, I think your husband is sleeping with Emily." It was crazy. But the silence was even worse. She went out into the yard, hoping the fresh air would clear her head. Across from the Clark's house, Oliver and Sophie were drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, while Emily sat on the porch with her laptop. Linda looked at her and felt a pang. Emily looked tired. Her movements were sharp, as if she was afraid to stop. "Does she know what I know?" Linda thought, but immediately discarded this thought. Tom said he wasn't sure, but she saw his eyes. He was sure, and she does too. Sarah stood at the sink in her kitchen, pouring coffee into a thermos before her shift. Zach had already left for school, and Matt had left for work earlier than usual, muttering something about a meeting. She noticed at his distance, his short answers, his gaze that avoided her. Yesterday at the garage, he was the same cold alien, and it was starting to scare her. She loved Matt. 14 years together, a son, a common house, this was her life. But the last few days he acted as if he wanted to run away. She tried to chalk it up to fatigue, to work, but her intuition screamed that it was something else. The phone rang, and she saw Linda's name. Sarah frowned. Linda rarely called just like that. She answered the phone. "Hey, Linda, what's new?" she said, trying to sound cheerful. "Hi, Sarah." Linda's voice was tense. Are you home now?" "Yes, I'm getting ready for my shift." Sarah leaned against the countertop. "And what?" Linda hesitated, and this silence said more than words. "I just wanted to talk," she finally said. "Can I come in for a minute?" "Of course, come in," Sarah shrugged, but her heart sank. Something was wrong. 5 minutes later, Linda was standing at her door, holding a mug as if she needed an excuse. Sarah let her in, and they sat down at the kitchen table. "Well, spit it out." Sarah crossed her arms, looking at Linda. "You look like you're about to tell me the world has ended." Linda smiled nervously, but her fingers tightened around the mug. "No, nothing like that," she said, but her voice was shaking. I noticed something at the barbecue, and I can't get it out of my head." Sarah frowned. "At the barbecue? What do you mean?" Linda swallowed, looking at the table. She didn't want to do this, but she could not remain silent. "Matt and Emily," she began quietly. "They went to the barn to get chairs while Jake was in the house. And Tom saw them. He thinks something was wrong." Sarah froze, her eyes narrowed. "Isn't that right? What do you want to say, Linda?" "I don't know for sure." Linda looked up, her face pale. "But Tom said they came out. Strange. It was as if they were hiding something, and I saw how they behaved after they barely spoke to each other, to us." "Didn't you notice anything?" Sarah laughed shortly, sharply, but the laughter was empty. "You're kidding, right?" she said, leaning back in her chair. "Are you implying that Matt and Emily, what? Sleeping with each other in a barn? This is nonsense, Linda." "I'm not saying that's exactly the case." Linda raised her hands defensively. I couldn't help but tell you. You are my friend, Sarah. If it were the other way around, I'd like to know." Sarah looked at her, and her smile slowly faded. She remembered Matt, his coldness, his lies about being tired, his redneck. She remembered Emily, her aloofness at the barbecue, her short answers yesterday. It was impossible. They were families, friends, almost family. But something in Linda's words caught her like a hook. "Are you serious?" she asked finally, her voice becoming quieter. "Do you really think they could?" "I don't know." Linda shook her head. But I saw their faces. And Tom, too. We didn't make this up, Sarah. Sarah stood up, her hands clenched into fists. Okay, she said sharply. Thank you for telling me. I'll figure it out. Linda nodded, feeling her stomach tighten. Sorry if I was wrong, she whispered. I just couldn't remain silent. Sarah didn't answer. She walked Linda to the door and closed it, leaving her alone. Her thoughts swirled like a whirlwind. It was crazy, but now she couldn't stop thinking about it. Emily returned home from the supermarket empty-handed. She forgot to buy anything after meeting Matt. She threw her bag on the table and sat down, covering her face with her hands. Yesterday in the car by the river, it was like a repetition of the barn crazy, wrong, but so alive. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't stop it. Every time she saw Matt, something inside her yearned for him, and she didn't know how to drown it out. Jake called at lunchtime, his voice cheerful. I'll be late today, he said. The client wants to reconsider the project. Order pizza for the kids, okay? Of course, she replied, trying to sound normal. Don't overwork yourself. I'll try, he laughed and hung up. She put the phone down and looked out the window. The Wilson house was quiet. Sarah had gone to work and Matt had not yet returned. Emily knew she had to stay away, but her fingers were already dialing his number. Emily? Matt's voice was hoarse, as if he was waiting for this call. Jake will be late, she said quietly. Where are you? In the office, he answered. And you? Home, she swallowed. We need to talk. Is it true? He fell silent, and she heard his breathing. Okay, he said finally. I'll arrive in an hour. She hung up, feeling. Sarah finished her shift early and drove home, but didn't go inside. She parked at the house and sat in the car, looking at the street. Linda's words swirled around her head like a thorn. She didn't want to believe it, but she couldn't help but think. When Matt's car pulled up to the Clark's house instead of theirs, her stomach lurched. She saw him come out, look back, and knock on Emily's door. The door opened, and he entered. Sarah gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. It could have been nothing, just a conversation. But after Linda's words, she was no longer sure. She started the engine and drove off to see her friend from the hospital, deciding not to return until she sorted it out. But doubt had already taken root, and it was growing every minute. Linda stood at the window, watching Matt walk in on Emily. She knew that Sarah was at work, that Jake was late, and she knew she had just lit a fuse that could blow everything up. For Jake Clark, the day dragged on forever. A meeting with a client lasted until 6, then traffic jams on the highway, and only at 7 he finally parked at his house. He turned off the engine of his pickup truck and sighed, rubbing his neck. He wanted beer, dinner, and a quiet evening with Emily and the kids. He entered the house, throwing the keys on the table by the door. The living room was quiet as Oliver and Sophie sat in front of the TV, finishing their pizza straight from the box. Emily stood at the kitchen counter, drying her hands on a towel. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her face looked paler than usual. Hey guys, Jake clapped his hands, making the kids jump. Dad's home. How are you? Dad. Sophie jumped up, running towards him with her hands sticky from the sauce. We're watching Paw Patrol. Great choice, baby. He picked her up, kissing the top of her head, and looked at Oliver. And you, champion, how are you? Okay, Oliver shrugged, not looking up from the screen. The pizza is already cold. Nothing, let's warm it up. Jake grinned and turned to Emily. Hello, Em. How's your day? She looked up, and for a second he thought she shuddered. Hello, she said quietly. Day is like day. You're late. Yes, the client got it. He went to the refrigerator, taking out beer. I wanted to redo half of the project an hour before the deadline. What did you do? It worked, she answered, too quickly. And I was just at home. Jake nodded, taking a sip of his beer. He wasn't suspicious by nature. His openness and faith in people was what made him Jake. But in the last few days, something has been wrong. Emily became quieter, more distant. She avoided his gaze, answered briefly, and even her smile seemed forced. He chalked it up to fatigue, the kids, her freelancing, but today the feeling intensified. "Are you okay?" he asked, putting the bottle on the table. "You're kind of, I don't know, tense." Emily froze, her hands clutching the towel. "I told you I'm tired." Her voice was harsher than she intended. "It's okay, Jake." He looked at her, narrowing his eyes. Her tone, her movements, all this was not like her. Emily was always soft, even when she was angry. And now she seemed guilty. He shook his head, pushing away the thought. It was stupid. "Okay, whatever you say." He shrugged and sat down at the table. "Leave me a piece of pizza, otherwise these monsters will eat everything." She nodded and walked to the sink, turning away. Jake looked at her back, and for the first time in 12 years, he felt like he didn't know what she was thinking. Earlier that evening, Matt had left the Clark house through the back door, while the kids were busy watching TV. Emily opened up to him after he called, and they got together again in the upstairs guest bedroom while Oliver and Sophie ate pizza. It was fast, quiet, full of shame and passion. When he left, Emily stood at the window, watching his car disappear around the corner. Matt returned home, hoping Sarah was still on shift. But her car was parked outside the garage, and his heart sank. He entered the house, trying to look normal. Sarah sat on the sofa with a glass of wine, looking into space. "Hi," he said, throwing the keys on the table. "You're early." "Yes, they let us go early," she answered without looking at him. Her voice was cold, and it hit him like a slap in the face. "Did something happen?" he asked, sitting down opposite. "No," she lied, taking a sip of wine. "It's just a hard day." Matt nodded, but her gaze sharp, searching said more than words. She saw him at Emily's house. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to doubt. And this silence was worse than a scream. Tom returned from work tired, but his fatigue was not physical. He saw Matt's car at the Clark house as he drove by, and that was the last straw. He entered the house, threw his briefcase on the floor, and found Linda in the kitchen, where she was cutting vegetables for dinner. "You were right," he said without preamble, sitting down at the table. "Something is happening." Linda froze, the knife hovering over the carrot. "What do you mean?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. "Matt visited Emily today." Tom rubbed his temples. "I saw his car. Jake hasn't returned yet. Sarah is at work. This is no accident, Linda." She put down the knife, her face turning pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I talked to Sarah today. Told her about the barbecue. She didn't believe it, but if she found out that he was there." "What did you do?" Tom jumped up, his voice became louder. "I told you to wait. I couldn't remain silent." She snapped, taking a step towards him. "It's gnawing at me, Tom. You saw them, I saw them. We can't pretend nothing is happening. So what now?" He clenched his fists. "Sarah will start digging, and Jake will too. So what do we say? We knew, but we're silent. Or, we saw it, but we're not sure. This will blow everything up, Linda. Did you want to live with this burden?" Her eyes sparkled. "I can't look at Sarah and pretend her husband isn't sleeping with Emily behind her back." Tom fell silent, looking at her. He knew she was right, but that didn't make the choice any easier. "We don't know for sure," he said finally, more quietly. "We assume." "Then why are you so sure?" Linda crossed her arms. "You saw his car. You saw their faces at the barbecue. This is not a guess, Tom. This is true." He sat back, covering his face with his hands. "I don't want to be the one who starts it," he muttered. "But you've already started." Linda nodded, feeling her stomach tighten. Jake finished his pizza and went upstairs to take a shower. Emily stayed downstairs, putting away boxes. He noticed that she was avoiding him, not looking him in the eye, not laughing at his jokes, not touching him as before. It was a small thing, but for Jake, who knew her like the back of his hand, it was a signal. He turned on the water in the shower and stood under the stream, trying to wash away the fatigue. But the thoughts did not go away. Emily acted like she was hiding something. He remembered how she was at the barbecue, quiet, distant. Yesterday it was the same. And today she barely spoke to him. It didn't look like her. Maybe she has someone, A thought flashed, and he immediately threw it away, laughing out loud. It was ridiculous. Emily? Hi, Emily. She's not like that. But the longer he thought, the less funny it seemed. He wasn't paranoid, but he wasn't blind. When he came downstairs, Emily was sitting on the couch, looking at her phone. He came and sat down next to her, putting his hand on her shoulder. Talk to me, he said quietly. Something is wrong, I can see it. She winced, putting the phone away. Nothing, Jake, she replied, forcing herself to smile. I'm just tired. You've been saying this for 3 days. He looked into her eyes. If there is something with work, with children, with me, tell me. We're a team, right? Yes, she nodded, but her voice was empty. Everything is fine. Is it true? He looked at her for another second, then nodded. Emily looked after him, feeling tears burning her eyes. Wednesday on Oak Hill Lane started with cloudy skies that seemed to reflect the mood in the homes. The morning passed in the usual bustle. The children went to school, the adults went about their business. But by evening, as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the streetlights came on, the tension that had been smoldering beneath the surface was ready to flare up. Tom returned home later than usual, his shoulders hunched and his face drawn. Working at the bank was hard, endless spreadsheets, meetings with clients, pressure from superiors, but today his fatigue was deeper. He dropped his briefcase by the door and walked into the living room where Linda was sitting on the sofa with a book. She didn't read it, she just held it in her hands, looking into emptiness. Hello, he said, sitting down in the chair opposite. His voice was hoarse, as if he had been silent all day. Hello, she replied, closing the book. Her eyes were red, and Tom knew she had been crying. They were silent, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. That sound was the only thing that broke the silence until Linda spoke. I can't do this anymore, Tom, she said quietly but firmly. This is killing me. He looked at her, feeling his insides tighten. What kills? He asked, although he knew the answer. This, she waved her hand as if pointing to the entire street. Matt, Emily, Sarah, Jake. What we know. What I told Sarah yesterday. Tom clenched his fists and his face darkened. I asked you to wait, Linda, he said, his voice becoming louder. We agreed. And you went and laid it all out. I didn't post it. She jumped up, throwing the book on the sofa. I hinted. I couldn't look at Sarah and pretend everything was fine. Could you? Yes, he barked, also standing up. Because it's none of our business. This is their life, their marriages, their mistakes. We're not judges, Linda. Who are we then? Her voice trembled, but there was steel in it. Neighbors who remain silent while their friends destroy each other. I can't live like this, Tom. I'm not like that. He stepped towards her, his eyes sparkling. And I don't want to be the one who ruins their lives, he shouted. Do you understand what will happen if Sarah finds out? What if Jake finds out? It's not just divorces, it's children, it's our friendship, it's everything we've built over the years. Do you understand that we are already part of this? Linda came closer, her face inches from his. You saw them in the barn. You saw Matt at Emily's yesterday. We can't wash our hands of this by pretending we don't know anything. Tom turned away, clenching his jaw. He felt trapped between his conscience and the fear of consequences. Linda was right, he knew more than he wanted, but he didn't want to be the one to pull the trigger. I don't want to start this, he said more quietly, looking at the floor. I don't want to be the one who ruins everything. And I don't want to be the one who watches how it destroys itself. Linda wiped away a tear, her voice becoming softer. If it were you, Tom, if you cheated on me and someone knew and remained silent, I would not forgive. Never. He looked at her and his anger turned to pain. Linda was his anchor, soft but steadfast, always ready to stand up for what she believed in. And now she stood in front of him, torn between duty and love for him. What do you want from me? He asked finally, so that I go to Jake. To Sarah, said, Hey, your spouses are sleeping with each other. No, she shook her head. I want us to decide together. But I can't remain silent forever. It's too big. Tom sat back, covering his face with his hands. He felt their marriage cracking under the weight. They were together for 11 years, without children, but with a strong bond built on trust. And now this trust was being tested not because of betrayal, but because they knew about someone else's. "Let's give them a chance," he said finally, looking up. "If they open up on their own, if something comes up, we don't interfere. But if not, we will decide. Together." Emily sat in her bedroom, looking at the ceiling. Jake was downstairs watching TV with the kids, and she ran down here on the excuse of a headache. Last night with Matt in the guest bedroom played in her head like a broken record. It was crazy doing this in my house while the kids were eating pizza downstairs. But she couldn't stop. Every time she saw him, something inside her yearned for him, and she hated herself for it. She took the phone and texted him. "We have to stop. This is too dangerous." But I didn't send it. Her fingers hovered over the screen, and then she erased the message. She knew she wouldn't stop. Not now. Jake knocked on the door, and she flinched. Are you alive there?" he asked, looking in. "Shall I get you some water?" "No, I'm fine," she replied, sitting down. "I'll just lie down." He looked at her, and his gaze was heavy. "You're avoiding me," he said quietly. "I'm not blind, Emily. What's happening?" Her heart sank, but she forced herself to smile. "Nothing, Jake," she lied. "Is it true?" He nodded, but didn't believe it. He closed the door, and Emily heard him go downstairs. Matt sat in his car outside the office, not daring to drive home. Sarah had been cold and distant yesterday, and he felt like she knew something. He didn't see her car at Emily's house, but her look said more than words. He was trapped between his love for Sarah and this crazy attraction to Emily. His phone rang, and he saw Sarah's name. He picked up the phone, trying to sound normal. "Hello," he said. "Hi," her voice was dry. "Where are you?" "In the office. I was late," he lied. "And you?" "At home," she answered. "Come. We need to talk." He swallowed, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Okay," he said. "I'll be there soon." She hung up. Tom and Linda went to bed in silence. They lay with their backs to each other, feeling a wall between them for the first time in years of marriage. Linda closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. She thought about Sarah, about what she had said to her, about what she saw in her eyes: mistrust, fear, anger. She knew she had lit the fuse and was afraid it would reach the bomb. Sarah sat on the sofa, twirling an empty wine glass in her hands. She had been waiting for Matt for an hour since she called him. Her thoughts were chaotic. Linda's words, Matt's car at Emily's house, his coldness of the last few days. She tried to convince herself that this was nonsense, that Linda had made a mistake, that her marriage was not falling apart at the seams. But the longer she sat, the stronger the feeling that everything was falling apart grew. The door opened and Matt walked in, throwing his keys on the table. His face was pale, his eyes avoided her gaze. He looked like he knew what was coming. "Hi," he said quietly, stopping at the entrance to the living room. "Is Zach sleeping?" "Yes," she answered without getting up. "Sit down, Matt. We need to talk." He nodded and sat down in the chair opposite, clasping his hands between his knees. His posture was tense, like that of a man ready to run. Sarah looked at him, and her heart sank with pain and anger. "What's happening?" she finally asked. Her voice was even, but there was a sense of threat in it. "And don't lie to me, Matt. I'm tired of your tired and work." He swallowed, looking at the floor. "Nothing is happening," he said, but his voice trembled. "It's just a tough week." Sarah laughed shortly, bitterly. "Hard week?" She stood up, stepping towards him. "You're lying to my face, and I can see it. Linda came today. Do you know what she said?" Matt looked up, and fear flashed in them. "What?" he asked, although he already knew. "She said you and Emily were at the barbecue." Sarah crossed her arms, her voice getting louder. "That Tom saw you, that you came out as if you had been caught. Is this true, Matt?" He froze, his face turning white. He could lie again, say it was a misunderstanding, that Tom was mistaken. But her gaze, sharp, full of pain, burned out any lie. "Sarah," he began, but she interrupted. Answer, she shouted, her voice breaking. Did you sleep with Emily in the barn? Yes or no? Matt closed his eyes, feeling the world crumble beneath his feet. Yes, he said quietly, almost in a whisper. Sarah recoiled as if he had struck her. She could not restrain herself and slapped him in the face. How could you? She screamed, tears streaming from her eyes. With Emily, with my friend. Matt didn't resist, his head dropped. I didn't mean to, he said, his voice shaking. It just happened. It just happened. She grabbed a pillow from the sofa and threw it at him. 14 years old, Matt. We have a son. And you sleep with our friend's wife in a barn like some student. He stood up, trying to approach her. Sarah, I'm sorry, Don't touch me. She pushed him away, her hands trembling. How many times? Was it just then? Matt hesitated, and that silence was louder than any words. Oh God, Sarah covered her face with her hands, her voice becoming hoarse. How many times, Matt? Speak. A few, he managed, looking at the floor. She looked at him, and in her eyes there was not only pain, but also hatred. Yesterday, she said slowly, you were with her. I saw your car. Did you sleep with her while I was on shift? He nodded, and it was like a knife in her heart. Get out, she said, her voice turning icy. Take your things and get out of my house. Sarah, please, he stepped towards her, but she retreated. Get out, she shouted, pointing to the door. I don't want to see you. Never. Matt stood looking at her, but couldn't find the words. He went into the bedroom, grabbed his bag, and threw a few things into it. When he returned to the living room, Sarah was standing by the window, her face turned away. He wanted to say something, but her silence was a wall. He walked out, slamming the door, and got into the car, not knowing where to go. Earlier that evening, Linda broke down. After an argument with Tom, she decided that silence was no longer an option. She called Sarah and asked to meet. They were sitting in a cafe in downtown Austin, away from the street where they could be seen. I have to tell you, Linda began, clutching her cup of coffee. This is not just a barn. Tom saw Matt at Emily's yesterday, when you and Jake weren't home. Sarah looked at her, her face stony. Are you sure? She asked quietly. Yes, Linda nodded. I didn't want to believe it, but it's true, Sarah. I'm sorry. Sarah pursed her lips, her eyes sparkling. Thank you for telling me, she said, standing up. I'll sort it out. Linda remained seated, feeling guilt tighten in her chest. She knew that she had just destroyed her family, but she could not do otherwise. Emily lay in bed listening to Jake shower. She didn't know that Sarah kicked Matt out. She didn't know that Linda told the truth. But she felt that something was wrong. Jake came out of the bathroom, drying his hair with a towel. Are you sleeping? He asked, sitting down on the bed. No, she answered, looking at the ceiling. He looked at her, and his face became serious. You've been avoiding the Wilsons, he said quietly. I noticed. Why? Emily froze, her heart pounding. I'm just tired, she lied. Nothing like that. I'm tired, he repeated, and bitterness flashed in his voice. You say this every day. Something's wrong, Emily, and I want to know what. She turned to him, forcing herself to smile. It's okay, Jake, she said. Good night. Tom was sitting on the porch of his house when he saw Matt's car drive away from the Wilsons' house. He realized that something had happened. Linda came out to him, her face pale. I told Sarah, she said quietly. All. Tom looked at her, and his eyes darkened. Do you understand what you've done? He asked. Yes, she answered, sitting down next to him. They were silent, looking at the dark street. Emily woke up early, but didn't get up. She lay in bed, listening to Jake get ready for work. Jake went downstairs, poured some coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table. He didn't turn on the TV, didn't check his phone, he just sat there, looking into his mug. Oliver and Sophie were still asleep, and the house was unusually quiet. When Emily finally came down, her hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. Good morning, she said quietly, stopping at the stairs. Morning, he answered without looking up. His voice was smooth, but there was steel in it. She walked towards the coffee maker, trying to move naturally, but her hands were shaking. Jake looked at her, his gaze hard as concrete. "You lied again yesterday," he said finally, putting the mug down. "I'm tired of this, Emily." She froze, holding the coffee pot in her hands. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "You know what I'm talking about." He stood up, stepping towards her. "You're avoiding me, you're avoiding Sarah, you're avoiding Matt. You barely talk to me. What's happening?" Emily swallowed, setting the coffee pot back down. She could lie again, say about being tired, about work. But his eyes, the same ones that she had loved for 12 years, looked at her with pain and suspicion, and it broke her. "It's okay, Jake," she said, but her voice wavered. "It's just, I need time." "Time?" He laughed, but the laugh was bitter. "You're asking for time, and I don't even know what's wrong. Do you think I'm blind? I see how you look out the window, how you twitch when I ask about the Wilsons. What are you hiding?" She turned away, clenching her hands into fists. Her heart was pounding, and she felt the truth rushing out like water over a dam. "Nothing," she repeated, but it was weak, almost a whisper. Jake stepped closer, his voice getting louder. "Stop lying," he shouted, and she flinched. "I'm not stupid, Emily. You act like you have someone. Is that so? Do you have someone?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "No," she lied, but her voice broke. "Then why don't you look at me?" He grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to turn around. "Why are you trembling? Tell me the damn truth." Emily closed her eyes, feeling tears running down her cheeks. She didn't want this. She wanted to save their family, their children, their lives. But the lie no longer holds. "I'm sorry," she whispered, opening her eyes. It was Matt." Jake froze, his hands tightening on her shoulders. "What?" he asked quietly, as if he hadn't heard. "Matt," she repeated, her voice shaking. "At the barbecue. And after, I cheated on you." The second of silence was deafening, and then Jake let her go, stepping back as if she had hit him. "Matt," his voice was hoarse, full of disbelief. "Matt Wilson?" She nodded, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry, Jake," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. I didn't want to." "Error?" he barked, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "You slept with Matt while I was grilling ribs for all of us, and it was a mistake? How many times, Emily? How many?" She cowered, her shoulders shaking. "A few," she whispered. I I couldn't stop." Jake hit the table with his fist, and the coffee mug fell, breaking into pieces. Emily winced, retreating towards the wall. "You couldn't stop?" He stepped towards her, his face red with anger. "We have 2 children, 12 years together. Have you decided to throw everything in the trash?" "Sorry," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "I hate myself for this." "Do you hate yourself?" He laughed, and this laugh was full of pain. He turned away, squeezing his head in his hands. Emily stood there crying, not knowing what to say. She waited for him to scream some more, to hit something, but he was simply silent, and this silence was the worst of all. "I'm leaving," he said finally, turning to her. "I need time. I can't be here." "Jake, please." She stepped towards him, but he raised his hand. "Don't touch me," he said coldly. "I don't know who you are now." He grabbed the keys and walked out, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. Emily fell to her knees, sobbing as the rain hammered on the windows. "Sarah called Linda this morning, her voice empty." "You were right," she said. He admitted. This happened more than once. Linda froze, holding the phone. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want it to happen like this." "Whether she wanted to or not, it doesn't matter anymore." Sarah smiled bitterly. "Thank you for telling me. Now I know." She hung up and Linda stood there, guilt tightening in her chest. She knew that the truth had destroyed the family, but she did not know how to live with it. Tom sat in his office, looking at the computer screen but not seeing the numbers. He felt that Linda had done something irreparable, and it was killing him. When she called him and told him about Sarah, he simply remained silent. "Are you happy now?" he asked finally, his voice cold. You achieved your goal. No, she answered, her voice trembling. I didn't want this, Tom, but I couldn't remain silent. You could, he said, but I chose not to remain silent. And now everything is on fire. He hung up, leaving her alone. Matt spent the night in a motel on the outskirts of Austin, staring at the ceiling of a cheap room. He lay awake, replaying Sarah's screams, her tears, her hatred in his head. He lost her, he lost Zach, he lost everything. And Emily, he didn't know what was wrong with her, but he felt that everything was falling apart there too. He took the phone and texted her. Sarah knows. Sorry. But he didn't send it. He threw the phone on the bed and covered his face with his hands, feeling lonely. Jake was driving along the highway to work. His hands were clutching the steering wheel, and Emily's voice was playing in his head. It was Matt. He couldn't believe that his best friend, the person with whom he had shared beer, laughter, and years of friendship, had betrayed him. And Emily is his Emily, the mother of his children. He hit the steering wheel, cursing out loud. Emily rose from the floor when she heard the children's footsteps upstairs. She wiped away her tears and walked towards them, forcing herself to smile. They shouldn't know. Polka. As Thursday afternoon wore on, the rain picked up on Oak Hill Lane, turning lawns into muddy puddles. The street was quiet, the children were sitting at home, and the adults were hiding from the dampness. But this silence was deceptive, like the calm before an explosion. At the Clark house, Emily sat with Oliver and Sophie, helping them draw, but her mind was far away. She didn't know where Jake was, what he was doing, whether he would come back. Her phone was silent, and this silence was like a knife. Matt returned to the street around 6. He spent the day at the motel, but could no longer sit within 4 walls, looking at the shabby wallpaper. He needed to get things from the house, clothes, documents, something that would remind him of Zach. He parked the car at the Wilsons' house, hoping Sarah was still on shift. But as he walked out, his eyes fell on Jake's pickup truck, which had just pulled into the Clark's driveway. Jake sat in the cab, gripping the steering wheel. He had spent the day at a bar, had drunk more than he should have, and now the alcohol was boiling in his blood, mixing with anger. He saw Matt's car, he saw him walking towards his house, and something inside him snapped. He jumped out of the truck, slamming the door so hard the windows shook, and walked across the street towards Matt. "Hey, bastard!" Jake shouted, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Stop where you are." Matt turned around and his face went pale. He knew it was inevitable, but he wasn't ready. Not now. "Jake, listen," he began, raising his hands, but Jake didn't let him finish. "Shut up," he barked, flying up to Matt. "You slept with my wife, you piece of shit." Matt tried to push him away, but Jake was stronger, his rage giving him strength. He hit Matt. "Jake, stop," Matt shouted. "I didn't want this. You didn't want to. You were my brother, Matt." Matt didn't resist. He knew he deserved it. "Sorry, damn it," Matt shouted. "It was a mistake. Error?" Jake jumped up, his eyes wild. "I have children. You have a son. And you ruined everything because you couldn't keep your pants on." Emily heard the noise and ran out onto the porch. Her heart sank. She saw Jake and Matt and rushed towards them. "Stop it," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Jake, Matt, stop it. Are you protecting him?" He snapped, pointing at Matt. "After everything you did to him." "No, She choked, tears streaming down her face. "I just want this to end. Is it over?" Jake stepped towards her, his voice full of pain. "It ended when you went to bed with him, Emily." Matt stood up, wiping the blood from his face. "Jake, it's my fault," he said hoarsely. "Beat me if you want, but leave her." "Shut up." Jake turned to him, his fists clenching. At that moment, Sarah's car pulled up. She jumped out, her face white with horror. "What are you doing?" she shouted, rushing towards them. "Stop it, both of you." Jake stopped when he saw her. Sarah stood between him and Matt, her eyes blazing. "You," she turned to Matt, her voice shaking. "I kicked you out and you're still here? Get out." "Sarah, He began, but she interrupted. "Shut up," she barked. And you, she looked at Emily, how could you? Emily covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I'm sorry, Sarah, she sobbed. I don't know how it happened. Don't know. Sarah took a step towards her, but Jake grabbed her hand. Enough, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. This is between us. Sarah struggled but retreated, looking at them all with disgust. Matt stood with his head down, blood dripping onto the grass. Jake turned to Emily. I'm leaving, he said. He walked towards the pickup without looking back. Emily called after him, but he didn't stop. Sarah looked at Matt one more time, then went into her house, slamming the door. Tom and Linda watched all this from the window of their house. Linda pressed her hand to the glass, her face wet with tears. It's because of me, she whispered. I told Sarah. Tom stood nearby, his hands clenched into fists. No, he said coldly. It's because of them. But you brought a match. She turned to him, her eyes sparkling. Would you prefer to remain silent? She asked. Watching them lie to all of us? I'd rather we weren't in this shit. He turned away. But now it's too late. Linda fell silent, feeling the gap between them growing. They stood at the window and knew that their marriage was also under attack. Emily returned to the house, her clothes wet. Oliver and Sophie stood by the stairs, their eyes wide with fear. Mom, why did Dad shout? Oliver asked in a trembling voice. Emily fell to her knees, hugging them. Everything will be fine, she lied, hugging them to her. Dad is just tired. But she knew that nothing would be fine. She lost Jake, she lost Sarah, she lost everything. Matt got into the car. He started the engine and drove away without looking at the Clark or Wilson house. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew there was nowhere to return. Jake stopped at a motel on the outskirts of town, the same one where Matt spent the night. He rented a room and collapsed on the bed, looking at the ceiling. He lost his wife, his friend, and his family, and he didn't know how to live further. Sarah sat in her living room, looking at the photo of Zach. She didn't cry, she had run out of tears. She was just waiting for the morning to call the lawyer. The rain continued to fall. Oak Hill Lane was no longer what it used to be. Emily woke up to an empty bed, her eyes puffy from crying. She stayed up almost all night, replaying in her head Jake's screams, his departure, the children's faces full of fear. Oliver and Sophie stayed home. School had canceled due to the weather, and she tried to keep them occupied with cartoons and breakfast. But her thoughts were elsewhere with Matt, with what they had done, with what she had lost. She sent the children into the living room and picked up the phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed out a message. Where are you? She knew she shouldn't do this, that it would only make things worse, but she couldn't stop. Matt was the only one who understood what she felt, her complicity, her sin, her salvation. The answer came a minute later. Motel on 71st, number 12. Come if you want. Emily clutched the phone, her heart pounding. It was crazy. Oliver, Sophie, she called, forcing her voice to sound even. I'll go get groceries. Stay here, I'll be back soon. Okay, Mom, Oliver replied without looking up from the screen. Sophie nodded, chewing her toast. Emily grabbed her keys and walked out without looking at the Wilson house. She got into the car and drove off, feeling guilt and desire fighting inside her. Matt sat on the edge of the motel bed. When there was a knock on the door, he flinched. He opened it, and there stood Emily, wet from the morning dampness, with red eyes and trembling hands. You look terrible, she said quietly as she entered. You too, he replied, closing the door. His voice was hoarse, but there was a faint smile in it. They stood in silence, looking at each other. It was ridiculous, dangerous, but in this motel, far from their ruined lives, they felt alive. This is the end, right? She whispered. We lost everything. Yes, he looked at her, and in his gaze there was a mixture of pain and something else. But you are here. Emily swallowed, feeling his words cut into her. She had to leave, return to the children, and try to save at least something. But instead, she leaned toward him, and their lips met slowly, almost tenderly, unlike their previous violent encounters. It was not about passion, but about consolation, about the last breath of air before drowning. When it was all over, they lay side by side, looking at the ceiling. Emily pressed herself against his shoulder, her tears streaming down his skin. "Maybe it's fate," she whispered. "We are with you." "No," Matt shook his head, his voice empty. "This is hell. We created it ourselves." She fell silent, feeling the truth of his words pressing on her. It wasn't fate. This was punishment. "I have to get back to the children," she said finally, sitting down. "They shouldn't be alone." "Yes," he nodded, without looking at her. "And I have nowhere to go." Emily stood up, pulling on her clothes. She looked at him broken, lost, just like her. "Sorry," she said quietly. "You too," he replied, and that was the last thing they said to each other at that moment. She left, leaving him at the motel, and drove home, feeling the emptiness growing inside her. Jake spent the morning at the bar, but returned to the motel by lunchtime. He couldn't drink forever, he needed to think about what to do next. He rented the same room where Matt had spent the night without knowing it and collapsed on the bed, looking at the phone. There was a message from Oliver. "Dad, when are you coming back?" He clenched his jaw, feeling tears sting his eyes. He didn't answer, he didn't know what to say. His thoughts revolved around Emily and Matt. He hated them both, but most of all, he hated himself for not noticing, not stopping, not protecting his family. He punched the wall, leaving a dent, and cursed out loud. Sarah sat on break in the hospital, staring into her empty cup of coffee. She didn't go home after her shift. She didn't want to see that house full of memories of Matt. She called Zach, who was at his grandmother's, and said she would pick him up later. She needed time to collect her thoughts. Linda wrote to her, "Sarah, I'm sorry if I made it worse." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't blame Linda. She blamed Matt, Emily, herself. But she was not going to forgive. Tom and Linda spent the morning in silence. He left for work without saying a word to her, and she stayed at home, looking at the empty street. When she saw Emily drive away and then return with red eyes, she knew this wasn't the end. She called Tom, but he didn't pick up. In the evening, he returned, and they ran into each other in the living room. "Have you seen her?" he asked, throwing his briefcase on the floor. Emily went somewhere again. "Yes," Linda nodded, her voice tired. "So what?" "They won't stop," he said, looking at her. "Even after all this." "Did you want me to be silent?" She crossed her arms. "So that we can watch them lie to us all. I wanted us to live our own lives," he raised his voice. Linda fell silent, her eyes filling with tears. "You blame me," she said quietly. "But you knew too." And he was silent. "Because I didn't want it," he shouted. "And you went and blew everything up." They stood looking at each other and felt the gap between them growing deeper. Linda turned away, going into the bedroom, and Tom remained in the living room, looking into the darkness outside the window. Emily returned home, forcing herself to smile at the children. She prepared dinner, but didn't eat it herself. A piece wouldn't fit into her throat. When Oliver asked about Dad, she said that he would return soon, although she didn't believe it herself. Matt stayed at the motel, looking at his phone. He texted Sarah, "Can I see Zach?" But there was no answer. He threw the phone on the floor and closed his eyes, feeling the loneliness consume him. Saturday arrived on Oak Hill Lane with a pale sun breaking through the clouds, illuminating the wet lawns and empty streets. After the rain, the air was fresh but heavy, as if it had absorbed the pain of the last few days. The Clark and Wilson houses stood quietly, their windows dark and their yards empty. The life that once flourished here seemed like a memory. Emily woke up to the sound of children's voices downstairs. Oliver and Sophie were arguing over the TV remote, and the sound was the only thing that kept her grounded in reality. She stood up, feeling her body aching with fatigue, and went down to the living room. The children looked at her, their faces worried. "Mom, will Daddy be back today?" Sophie asked, clutching the stuffed bunny. Emily swallowed, forcing herself to smile. "I hope so, baby," she said, stroking her head. "It just works." Oliver frowned, but didn't say anything. He was older, and Emily knew he felt more than he said. she looked away, unable to bear their anticipation. After breakfast, she sent them to play in the yard and took the phone. Jake didn't call, didn't write, and this silence was like a knife. She dialed his number, but he didn't answer. Then she wrote, "Jake, please come back. We need to talk, for the sake of the children." She sent a message and clutched the phone, praying that he would answer. An hour later, he wrote, "Meet me in the park by the lake. 2 hours, just you." Emily exhaled, feeling hope mixed with fear. She called a neighbor to watch the children and drove to the lake, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Jake sat on a bench by the water, looking at the ripples from the wind. His face was drawn, there were dark circles under his eyes, and his fists were still sore from his fight with Matt. He spent the night in a motel, then the morning in a bar, but alcohol did not help, it only increased his anger and pain. Emily's message took him by surprise. He didn't want to see her, but the words, "for the sake of the children," hurt him. Oliver and Sophie didn't deserve this. When Emily approached, he didn't get up. She stopped a few steps away, her hair flying in the wind and her eyes red. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly, sitting down next to him, but not close. "I'm not here for you," he answered coldly, looking at the water. "What do you want?" Emily clenched her hands, feeling his words cut into her. "I want you to come back," she said, her voice shaking. "For Oliver's sake, Sophie. They ask about you. I will do anything to fix this." Jake turned to her, his eyes full of anger. "To correct?" He smiled bitterly. "You slept with Matt at our house, Emily. How do you fix this? Do you have a magic wand to turn back time?" "I know what I did." She lowered her head, tears dripping onto her knees. "I hate myself for this. But I love you, Jake. And children. I want us to be a family." "Family?" He stood up, his voice became louder. "You destroyed our family when you lay with him. Do you think I can just forget this? Look at you and not see him?" "No," she shook her head, standing up. "I'm not asking you to forget. I ask you to give me a chance. I stopped it, Jake. It's over with Matt." He looked at her, and pain flashed in his gaze. "You stopped because you were caught," he said quietly, "not because I wanted to. I saw you with him yesterday. You were there at the motel, right?" Emily froze, her face turning pale. She didn't know how he found out, but lying didn't work anymore. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But that was the last thing, I swear." Jake turned away, clenching his fists. "I don't believe you," he said, "and I'll never be able to believe that you ruined it. I'll stay for the sake of the children, but between you and me, it's dead, Emily." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't want this." "But I did." He turned and went to the car, leaving it by the lake. Sarah sat in a cafe with a lawyer, looking at the papers in front of her. She called him in the morning, deciding it was time to act. Zach was at his grandmother's, and she didn't want him to see her like this, broken, but determined. "The divorce will be quick if he doesn't argue," said the lawyer, adjusting his glasses. "Do you want full custody?" "Yes," she answered, her voice firm. "And alimony. He won't see Zach until I decide." The lawyer nodded, making notes. "I'll have the documents ready by Monday," he said. "If anything changes, let me know." Sarah left the cafe, feeling the weight on her chest become a little lighter. She lost Matt, but she won't lose her son. She got into the car and drove to her grandmother's to pick up Zach, deciding she wouldn't look back. Matt stayed in the motel, looking at the empty bed where Emily had lain that morning. Her scent lingered on the sheets, and it was the only thing that connected him to anything alive. He lost everything: Sarah, Zach, Jake, his house. And Emily, despite their meeting, also slipped away. He knew that she had gone to her children to try to save what was left of her life, and he had nothing left. He picked up his phone and texted Sarah, "Please let me see Zach. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just that." But there was no answer, just like yesterday. He threw the phone on the table and lay down, closing his eyes. Loneliness was his punishment, and he accepted it. Emily returned home, her face wet with tears. She hugged the children, trying to hide her pain, but Oliver noticed. "Mom, were you crying?" he asked, looking at her. "I'm just tired, honey," she lied, kissing his forehead. "Everything will be fine." But she knew it was a lie. Jake will come back for the kids, but not for her. And Matt. She couldn't run to him anymore. That was the end. Sunday arrived on Oak Hill Lane with clear skies, the first time in a week without rain. The sun shone down on the street, revealing traces of the chaos of the last few days. The dirt on the Wilsons' lawn, the Clarks' empty yard, the closed curtains in Tom and Linda's house. Life did not return to its previous course, but began to emerge through the cracks, like grass after a fire. Emily woke up to the sound of the front door opening. She went downstairs, her heart pounding, and saw Jake standing in the living room, holding a bag. His face was tired, but his gaze was firm. Oliver and Sophie ran out of the kitchen shouting, "Daddy!" They rushed towards him, and he knelt down, hugging them. "Hey, guys," he said, his voice hoarse. "I missed you." Emily stood to the side, clasping her hands. She didn't know what to say, afraid to scare away the moment. Jake stood up, releasing the children, and looked at her. "I'm back," he said quietly, "for their sake. But don't think that everything is the same." She nodded, her throat tightening. "I understand," she whispered. "Thank you for coming back. This is not about you." He turned away, placing his bag by the stairs. "I'll sleep in the guest room. We need to agree on how to live further." Emily swallowed back her tears, feeling his words cut her. But it was better than nothing. She lost his love, but the children did not lose their father. "Okay," she said, "as you say." Jake nodded and went with the children to the kitchen, where they began to tell him about cartoons. Emily remained standing, looking at his bag. This was not a return to the past, but a new, cold order. She knew she deserved it. Sarah picked up Zach from his grandmother in the morning. He was sitting in the back seat, playing with the car, looking calmer than she expected. She looked at him in the rearview mirror and forced herself to smile. "How are you, champion?" she asked. "Fine," he answered without looking up. "Will Dad come back?" Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her smile faltering. "Not yet," she said softly, "but he loves you. We'll figure it out." Zach nodded, his silence heavier than words. Sarah knew he felt more than he said, but she couldn't give him any answers. She brought him home, and they walked into the Wilsons' empty house. She removed Matt's photos from the shelves, but his presence still lingered in the air. Later, she called Linda, her voice tired but firm. "I filed for divorce," she said. "The documents will be ready tomorrow." Linda froze, holding the phone. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "If I could change something." "No need," Sarah interrupted. "You did what you thought was right. It's not your fault." She hung up, leaving Linda in silence. Sarah knew that Linda was not to blame, but she had nothing to forgive the pain did not come from her. Matt sat in the motel, looking at his phone. A message from Sarah came an hour ago. "You can see Zach tomorrow. 15 minutes. At the house. Don't be late." He clutched the phone, feeling relief mixed with grief. 15 minutes is all he has left of his son. He lost the right to more. He thought about Emily, about their last meeting here in this room. She didn't write, didn't call, and he knew it was the end. He dialed her number, but hung up without waiting for an answer. They were each other's poison, and he couldn't drink it anymore. Matt stood up, gathered his things, and checked out of the motel. He went to an old friend in Austin, hoping to find some kind of shelter. But deep down he knew that this was an escape, not a salvation. Tom and Linda spent the morning at opposite ends of the house. He sat in the garage cleaning tools while she cleaned the kitchen. Their silence had become familiar, but today it was unbearable. By lunchtime, Linda couldn't stand it and went to him. "Tom," she said, standing in the garage door, "we can't go on like this." He looked at her, his hands hovering over the screwdriver. "How can we?" he asked, his voice tired. "I did what I thought was right." She stepped closer. "We are husband and wife," she said quietly. "We must be together, even in this." "Together?" He smiled bitterly. "You turned against me, Linda. You didn't ask, you didn't listen. How can I trust you after this? She walked towards him, her voice becoming softer. How can I trust you if you are ready to remain silent when everything collapses? She asked. We are different, Tom, but I love you, and I don't want to lose us. He looked at her, and his anger turned to pain. He loved her, always loved her, even now when she tore him apart with her stubbornness. I don't want to either, he said finally, but I need time. It's too much. Linda nodded, brushing away a tear. Okay, she said, but don't go. Please. He didn't answer, but walked over and hugged her. It was not reconciliation, but a truce fragile, but real. They stood in the garage, holding each other, and knew that their marriage would be different, but perhaps not lost. Jake spent the day with the children playing in the yard. He laughed with them, pushed Sophie on the swing, threw the ball to Oliver, but his gaze was blank. Emily looked at them from the window, feeling her heart clench. He was here, but not with her. That evening, he approached her in the kitchen while the children were watching TV. I'll stay, he said quietly, but no talk about us. Only children. If this thing continues with Matt, I'll leave for good. It's over, she answered, looking into his eyes. I swear. He nodded, but didn't fully believe it. He went into the guest bedroom, closing the door, and Emily was left alone, feeling like her life was becoming alien. Sarah brought Zach home and cooked dinner. She tried to be strong for him, but when he asked about Dad, her voice shook. You will see him tomorrow, she said. He will come. Zach nodded and went to his room. Sarah sat on the sofa, staring into space. She knew that divorce was the end, but also the beginning. She can handle it for Zach. Matt stopped at a friend's house, looking out at the dark windows. He knocked, and an old college friend answered the door, surprised but asking no questions. Matt walked in, throwing his bag on the floor and collapsing on the couch. It wasn't a home, but it was better than a motel. Tom and Linda lay down together, not turning away from each other for the first time in a week. They didn't speak, but their hands touched under the blanket, a small step towards what could have been. Monday on Oak Hill Lane began with the usual bustle. The school bus honked at 7 in the morning, children ran to the stop, and adults went about their business. The sun shone brighter than yesterday, but the warmth could not melt the cold that settled in the houses. The street looked much the same, but it was an illusion under the surface. Everything had changed forever. Emily stood at the stove, preparing breakfast for Oliver and Sophie. Jake sat at the table, reading the news on his phone, his face unreadable. The children ate their cereal, chatting about school, their voices the only thing that broke the silence between their parents. Emily glanced at Jake, hoping to catch some hint of warmth, but he wasn't looking at her. Oliver, don't forget your backpack, she said, putting a plate of toast on the table. I already took it, he replied, chewing. Dad, will you pick me up from football today? Jake nodded without looking up from his phone. Yes, at 5, he said. I'll be there. Emily pressed her lips together, feeling his coldness pressing down on her. He returned yesterday as promised, but it was not the Jake she knew. He was here for the children, and for them only. She put the coffee in front of him, but he didn't thank him, he just took the mug and drank. After the kids left for the bus, Jake stood up, getting ready to go to work. I'll be back by 6, he said, putting on his jacket. Don't wait for me for dinner. Okay, she answered quietly, looking at the floor. Jake, can we talk? Not now, later. He froze at the door, his hand clenching the handle. About what? He asked without turning around. About us, her voice trembled. About how to live further. We live for the sake of the children, he said coldly. There is nothing more to talk about. He left, slamming the door, and Emily was left alone. She sat down at the table, looking at the empty plates, and felt tears burning her eyes. She lost him not physically, but emotionally, and it was worse than if he left forever. Sarah took Zach to the bus and went to the hospital. Her shift started at 8, but she stopped by the house to get ready to meet Matt. He was due to come at 3 to see Zach, and she wanted everything to go smoothly for her son's sake, not for his sake. She put his things in boxes, leaving only what Zach needed, and texted him. 3 p.m. on the porch. Don't go in the house. At the hospital, she worked mechanically, checking patients, filling out charts. Colleagues noticed her detachment, but did not ask rumors of divorce had already reached them. At lunchtime, she went out to the parking lot and called Linda. "He'll see Zach today," she said, her voice level. 15 minutes, as I said. "Are you okay?" Linda asked, her tone cautious. "No," Sarah smiled bitterly, "but I can handle it. Thank you for being there." "Always," Linda replied. "If you need something." "I'll call." Sarah hung up and returned to work, keeping her emotions under control. At 3 o'clock, she stood on the porch, watching Matt's car drive up. Zach was sitting in the living room, playing with construction toys, and didn't know that his father would come. Matt left. He stopped a few steps away from Sarah. "Hello," he said quietly. "Thank you for allowing me." "This is not for you," she answered coldly. "Zach, come here." Zach ran out when he saw Matt, and his face lit up. "Dad," he shouted, rushing towards him. Matt knelt down, hugging him, and his eyes sparkled. "Hey, champion," he said, his voice shaking. "How are you?" "Okay," Zach smiled. "Will you come home?" Matt looked at Sarah, but she looked away. "Not yet," he said softly, "but I'll always be there, okay?" Zach nodded, and they spent their 15 minutes playing with the car on the lawn. Sarah stood at the door, arms crossed, keeping an eye on the time. When it came out, she called Zach. "It's time," she said. "Go home." Matt hugged his son again, whispered something in his ear, and stood up. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, looking at her. "Don't thank me," she replied. "That's all you'll get. Leave." He nodded and walked away to the car, feeling his heart clench. Sarah closed the door, pressing her back against it, and exhaled. Matt got into the car and drove off. Meeting Zach was a bright spot in his darkness, but it didn't save him. He stopped at a gas station, bought coffee, and texted Emily, "I'm leaving town. Sorry about everything." He sent the message and turned off the phone, deciding that this was the end. Tom returned home at 6, leaving his briefcase at the door. Linda sat on the couch reading a book, but her eyes were blank. He sat down next to her, and they were silent, listening to the silence. "I talked to Jake today," he said finally. He returned to Emily, "For the sake of the children." Linda nodded, closing the book. "Sarah called," she answered. "Matt saw Zach. She files for divorce." Tom looked at her, his face softening. "This is the end, right?" he asked. "Yes," she put her hand on his knee. He covered her hand with his, feeling the warmth of her skin. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "You did what you thought was necessary. I was just afraid." "I was afraid too," she looked into his eyes, "but I couldn't remain silent. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. I'm sorry I didn't support you." He squeezed her hand. "Can we handle it?" "I think so," she smiled weakly. "If we want." They sat there, holding hands, and for the first time in a week, they felt like they could breathe. Emily received a text from Matt that evening while she was cleaning up after dinner. She read it and froze, feeling like something inside was breaking. He left from the city, from her life. She didn't answer, just deleted the message and turned off the phone. This was the end of their sin, and she accepted it. Jake returned from football with Oliver, and they sat down to watch TV. Emily joined them, sitting on the other end of the couch. They didn't talk, but they were together for the sake of the children. It wasn't the family it used to be, but it was something. Sarah put Zach to bed by reading him a story. He asked about Dad again, and she said that he would come again someday. She left his room and sat in the kitchen with a glass of wine, looking at the papers from the lawyer. This was her new life, and she was ready for it. Matt drove down the highway, leaving Austin behind. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to start again. Tom and Linda went to bed, hugging each other for the first time in a week. They didn't talk about the past, but their breathing was in sync, and that was a promise. Oak Hill Lane fell silent under the stars. Friendships died, marriages changed, but life went on slowly, painfully, but inevitably. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.